Hello and welcome to another lecture by the IAPSS Political Theory SRC. The topic today is Politics of Self-Governance under the Paris Agreement, and the presenter is Anna from the SRC. Anna, the floor is yours.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. So first of all, thank you for your presence here today and for taking your time for this small session and to hear about or a little bit about my project, my research project. For those of you who haven't read the current template on this presentation, or just to let you know a little bit about me. I am based in Portugal. I'm currently a PhD candidate also in Portugal at University of Minho, and I also lecture the course of international organizations at the moment, which is a little bit related with my topic, and the dynamics of global governance, of course. And what I will be presenting to you today, it's pretty much my PhD research project, or at least the theoretical conceptual part of it. Because besides the presentation today and the topic of my presentation, I will also be working on some case studies that will be related to this theoretical component that I will be presenting. So the title of this presentation, and of course of my my project, is The Politics of Self-Governance under the Paris Agreement and the consequential emergence of substate actorness in climate change, which I aim to explain. So my presentation will go through 4 main parts. So firstly, I will introduce you to the general topic, just to get you contextualized. I will also talk to you about my contribution to the literature, followed by the theoretical framework. And I will also go through and close my presentation through the explanatory factors of the phenomenon that I will be studying. Okay, so first of all, this research is grounded on 3 main pillars, or 3 main research areas within the domain of international relations. Although I of course rely on some political science literature, such as the explanatory factors, and I will explain ahead. The main base of my research is international relations. So it firstly relies on global governance, which is the context within the phenomenon is taking place, followed by the concept of actorness, which is known within the literature, mainly literature on the EU, and then policy networks. So this one is more tied to maybe public administration, but here I take it to the global level. So what I've noticed is that in this increased international scenario of globalization, of course, and the dynamics of global governance, Some actors in the international system, actors or entities, we can start by saying entities, are taking opportunities that arise within the system to exercise actorness, or in other words, to become global actors by exercising actorness. But how do they do so? They do so by enrolling in policy networks, which I will further explain what it is. Or to be more clear, global policy networks, okay? The usual concept is policy networks, but here I will apply it at the global level. So I have identified here a phenomenon that usually, well, at least from the literature that I've been through, and it was a lot, I didn't really spot this concept, which is substate actorness. So actorness is usually applied to the EU to explain the EU's external action. And sometimes, but in a lower degree still, to international organizations such as the UN, and how these organizations are actually global actors. But here I've came up with substate actorness, which is how entities below the state level can also exercise actorness, can also be global actors and have influence in the international system. So from the literature on actorness, I have spotted that actorness consists on the performance of self-governance. And what does this mean? Self-governance is autonomy of action in global governance. So it's an actor's ability to be autonomous in their actions in the global system and be able to influence the dynamics that are going on this stage. But how do they do this? They do this by enrolling in policy networks. And what are policy networks? So policy networks at the global level are a set of initiatives, collaboration initiatives among a variety of actors that, of course, are dependent on their capabilities to do so. And what does this mean? It seems a bit complex. It means that for these entities to enroll in policy networks, for these entities to be able to collaborate with other actors in the system and to exercise self-governance, they need to have certain capabilities or resources which are defined by their domestic context. Means that these capabilities or resources are domestically defined. So this is a general introduction on the topic. So now that you are a bit more familiarized with the topic itself, I can tell you that the goal of my research is to describe this phenomenon, which is substate actorness, and to conceptually identify what it means to be an actor and in the international system, in this case by substate entities, which is an emerging phenomenon. And then I aim to explain it, meaning that how it takes place and how it happens. Okay. And all of this, of course, is within the domain in the literature of global governance, substate actorness, policy networks, and the explanatory factors, which I have taken mostly from the literature on EU integration. Just 1 second, I'll put my computer into charge so that you don't lose me. Sorry about that. So what it is, policy networks, how do they do this and how do they exercise self-governance or actorness in the global sphere? So policy networks are coordination initiatives or collaboration initiatives through which substate entities coordinate efforts to achieve the climate goals that were established under the Paris Agreement. So maybe I haven't framed it in these terms, but I'm accessing actorness in the domain of climate change. So, and within the specific context of the Paris Agreement, as I will explain further ahead. So policy networks are these collaboration initiatives that substate entities endorse along with other actors. And I have identified 3 types, we can say 3 types of coordination, where we can spot vertical coordination, where substate entities collaborate with other international entities, such as international organizations, such as the UN, other national entities, so they also collaborate with states, subnational, substate entities with substate entities, regions, and they also collaborate with infranational entities, which are local authorities. On the other side of the spectrum, we can find horizontal coordination, where we find initiatives where we see substate entities collaborating with NGOs, enterprises, universities, and so on. But also, and most of the initiatives are a mix of these two. So, so they combine initiatives among a variety of actors to achieve more effective results. So they coordinate efforts to achieve more effective climate policies, and therefore to become global actors, to exercise autonomy of action in the global system. So overall, I will be using policy networks as a sort of measurement to access actorness. So by verifying the number of initiatives, for example, and the type of initiatives that each actor that I will be studying gets enrolled on, I can look at the degree of actorness or at the degree of self-governance that each actor is able to perform. All right. So this brings me to my second point, which is the contribution to the literature. So I aim to bring most of my contribution towards the notion of governance, the conceptualization of governance. And my first objective is to expand the application of actorness. So actorness, the concept itself, is usually applied to the EU and international organizations. So here I aim to apply it to the infranational level or substate level. So expand its conceptual application. My second goal is to also clarify what it means to be a global actor by giving it a more explanatory capacity. So at the moment, the concept exists, but it doesn't really have an explanatory capacity, and we don't really have literature saying what does it mean to be a global actor. We just have general conceptualizations, and I will be expanding its explanatory capacity by relying on the literature of EU integration, which I will explain ahead, and the explanatory factors. In third place, I will try to explain how actorness is applied, and this hasn't also been done so far. We know that actorness exists. We know that there are general conceptualizations of actorness, but we don't really know how it happens. And in this case, I will try to explain how actorness is performed in the specific example of substate actorness, which is through policy networks, through vertical and horizontal coordination of efforts, through a set of collaboration initiatives in the specific domain of climate change. So going on, this brings me to the theoretical framework. And my theoretical framework is based on actorness and multi-level governance. So I'm pretty aware that usually actorness is not a theory, neither is multi-level governance, but I found that most theories of international relations, or also from other domains, are not sufficiently explanatory to frame the phenomenon that I am analyzing. So I take some grounds from actorness. And first of all, what actorness says is that actorness is exercised when an opportunity arises, and the opportunity is embraced as long as these entities have the capabilities or resources to perform it. So what actorness brings here is that, and applied to the specific case of climate change, is that we need an opportunity that was brought by the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement, in one of its articles, says that we need to recognize other entities beyond the states and their contribution to achieve the climate targets. So for the first time, we have an international entity at the global level recognizing that there is need to give other entities beyond or below, in this case, below the state, the autonomy to also do something. So we need to look at other sources of action. So here the Paris Agreement is framed as the opportunity to do so. So here the door was open for substate entities. They were now recognized as having an important role. Of course, this doesn't mean that they were recognized as negotiating parties in the Paris Agreement. No, they are not part of it. States continue to have their role in the assignment of the treaties, but they are recognized as having importance. So I consider that the Paris Agreement was the open opportunity for substate entities to be recognized. On the other hand, actorness says that they need to have capabilities or resources to get that opportunity. So these are domestically defined, and mostly only substate entities that have a certain degree of autonomy from their central state are able to do something at the international state. At the international stage, I mean. Mostly states or provinces or regions that belong to a federal state. So entities that have a certain degree, or at least a considerable degree, of autonomy to exercise self-governance. And then they apply these capabilities in policy networks, which is vertical and horizontal coordination, to effectively achieve substate actorness and to become global actors in the system. So next, I rely also on the approach of multi-level governance. For those who are not familiar, multi-level governance is not a theory. It's an approach that was born to be applied to the European Union. But here I take it once again out of the context. And multi-level governance was conceived by Hug and Marx, and they made a distinction between multi-level governance type 1 and multi-level governance type 2. So multi-level governance type 1 says that there is authority dispersion among levels of authority. So multi-level governance 1 conceives I can say levels of governance. We can see like a pyramid, and the authority starts to become diffused among these levels. So multi-level governance 1 I here use to explain the context. So multi-level governance is my why, and multi-level governance as a whole may help to expand the theory of actorness that I've previously described. So multi-level governance recognizes that there exists this diffusion of authority between different levels of governance, and this transposing here to my case to the Paris Agreement and to climate change, we can frame it in terms of the Paris Agreement and in terms of the context. So multi-level governance explains why an opportunity was opened by the Paris Agreement. So due to the fact that authority is diffused among these different levels, we have an international entity such as the UN that recognized this need to give other entities, in this case below the state, the opportunity to have something to say and to recognize them as important players in the climate change game. So first, we have states that recognize that they alone cannot manage climate change, and they pass towards the UN the capacity to dialogue, or at least dialogue climate change at an international level. And then this entity conceives that they alone, so the United Nations and states themselves cannot do it. So there's this opportunity given by the UN to other entities such as substate entities, or in this case, substate actors, to do something. So multi-level governance is my why, so describes why does the substate actorness emerge. So because of this authority dispersion, and describes the context and how the opportunity was open. And then on the other hand, multi-level governance type 2 is my how, explains how it takes place. So multi-level governance 2 says that there's this diffusion of authority among these different levels, and other actors take the opportunity to act across this level, these different levels. So we have entities that now have a certain degree of capacity to act, and they take action in the shadow of hierarchy. So we have actions taking place beyond the central state. And this happens through policy networks precisely. So multi-level governance too explains how substate actorness happens. But, however, substate actorness, as I've said when I spoke about the resources and capabilities, is limited, meaning that the level or the degree of actorness that substate entities are able to perform is limited by a set of explanatory factors, and the degree of autonomy that they have to engage in policy networks and in all these initiatives that makes them players at the global stage. So I've chosen a set of explanatory factors. So the factors that explain the degree of self-governance or the degree of actorness, in other words. And I've taken these from the literature of actorness, but also from literature on territorial mobilization of the EU. So actorness is influenced by the degree of separateness or the constitutional status that each entity has, the degree of internal cohesion or the degree of nationalism that they have, party politics, which is the parties that are in power at a specific moment of time, entrepreneurship that is endorsed by the leaders, wealth and issue salience. Of course, all of these explanatory factors are variable, meaning that if we apply to a specific case study, we might evidence that the degree of separateness and party politics may have more influence, and some are more important than others. So these explanatory factors are variable. So we have different substate entities in the international system. We have different countries with different political systems. So this will always be variable. So we may have two actors that are trying to exercise substate self-governance, for example, and one might be more successful than the other just because they have, I don't know, more constitutional powers to do so than the other. Okay, so the degree of self-governance is variable. I bring here an example. Well, these are the case studies that I will be analyzing. But I won't go into this today. I just brought it here as a sample for you to understand how variable they are, and they are variable according to the nature of each region, in this case, province and federal state. So if we look into Quebec, in terms of constitutional status, I will be evaluating the degree of international competencies that they have, and also the degree of autonomy that they have in climate policy. For example, Quebec has almost unlimited powers or an almost unlimited autonomy in terms of international competencies, and the same doesn't happen in California, which is way more limited by the American Constitution. The same applies to climate policy. Also, party politics plays a really important role here. So when I look at party politics, I look at the congruence or incongruence between the party in power at the substate level and the party in power at the central state level. For example, during the Trump administration in California, California was a clear contrast and was really in an incongruence case, because California, it was pretty much towards an active climate policy, and the same didn't happen with the party, or in this case, the person in power at the central state level or at the federal state level. Also, the entrepreneurship, so the degree that each leader is willing to go, and how they intend to be active. Also, the wealth, the size of the economy is also important. Of course, to endorse in such initiatives, players need to have considerable economic power to get enrolled. Issue silence, meaning that does climate change mean something to them? Does it have something related with their history, with their past, with their sense of identity? And finally, nationalism or internal cohesion, which is particularly important in Quebec, for example, and they see climate change as being attached to their identity. For example, here connecting nationalism and internal cohesion with issue salience, and their need to distinct themselves from the central states might be also a justification to enroll in these type of actions at the international level. So just to close, the explanatory factors are the political science component of my project, and it's a really important one, but it mostly relies in the field of international relations. So this is pretty much it from my side. Thank you for listening to me. And now I'm open for your questions and suggestions if you have them.
Thank you very much for presenting. That was really interesting. We can start with questions. Anyone who would like to go first? Okay, how could you maybe go back to the table that you had presented? The second to last slide that you had. I think it was slide number 5 or 6. No, oh no, my bad. It was after that. It was no, it was the slide before the end of your presentation. Apologies. Yes, that one.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
One second. I was wondering if you could please elaborate on the relationship of party politics. I don't know how relevant that is for the topic. If you could elaborate on the relationship of party politics between the well, first of all, the substate actors, but also of perhaps the local governance in California, for example.
Okay. So what happens is that usually when we have different parties in power, in the substate level, well, here I'm of course analyzing the domestic context. Okay, so when we have parties at the substate level that are not the same at the central state level, they are usually in, well, many times in conflict, of course, sometimes more than others. And I gave the case of Donald Trump and the fact that that California is purely a Democrat state, and at the time Donald Trump was at the power under the Republican Party. And what happens is that when there is this party incongruence, substate entities might use this strategy to differentiate themselves from the central state, or at least differentiate them from the party that is in power in the central state. Not only to make this distinction, saying that, okay, we have our own identity and we don't agree with what they are doing at the state level, but also here as a way to challenge the central state, if we can put it that way, to challenge and to say, oh, look, I'm here at the international stage and I'm taking actions. I'm here to exercise self-governance along other actors, and I have autonomy for you, from you. I mean, so it's also a way of challenging the central state in power, and to make this distinction on ideas, and many times this distinction of identity between who is in the central central state position and substate level. So this is why party congruence or party incongruence is important, and it's actually, I would say, maybe not the first, because the constitutional status and the constitutional autonomy to do so is really important, but maybe the second most important explanatory factors to explain why do they endorse in such strategies. I don't know if I've explained sufficiently the California case.
It was actually. I was wondering if there is a relationship between the party politics and internal cohesion, perhaps, or because, like, thinking about it, it would make sense that it might disturb the flow of things. But I cannot find a relationship just by how one might affect another just by looking at the table.
Yes, well, most of them are related, and nationalism or internal cohesion is pretty much related with party politics, because when at the substate level there is a high degree of nationalism, there is this sense of showing that they are different from the central power, if you see what I mean. So the more nationalism exists at the substate level, the more the party in power, let's say, wants to differentiate themselves from the party that is there, especially if the party in power is not supportive of this this cohesion or of these nationalist movements or nationalist sense of being. So when there is party incongruence, nationalism might be higher, of course. So yes, of course, they are related, and they complement themselves, of course.
Thank you for clarifying that. Do we have any other questions from someone? Now that I can see everyone.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm not related or familiar with the literature, but can you elaborate a little more on the concept of nationalism? Because, well, I'm from Chile, and usually the nationalism is very related to the populism discourses. I think people only can act if they already had this sense of urgency. This is a thing that is always we can find in nationalism. Nationalism is related to the drive of people. I think this is an important and indispensable concept if we want to create an environment to act with a sense of urgency and responsibility. I don't know if you can elaborate a little more.
Of course. So when I say nationalism, I'm not saying in a populist connotation. So when I say nationalism, I transpose it to a sense of identity, in terms, sometimes in the case of Quebec, sometimes a sense of being a nation, which is not the case of California, of course. They are well integrated in the United States. That's why I say that Quebec has a high degree of nationalism and California doesn't. So it is related to this sense of identity and this sense of common share of values, and a populist or anti-system, if we can put it that way, or an anti-system positioning. So it's related with identity, a common history, a common culture, of course, that sometimes is different from the ones of the central state, like it happens in Quebec and Canada. So Canada has this issue with Quebec, that Quebec identifies with a different history, a different culture that is different from the other English Canada. So yes, it's in the sense of identity, in the sense of sometimes nationhood, that I'm talking about, and not in a populist anti-system notion. Was it clear? I don't know if I was clear enough.
It was very clear. Yes, I was thinking in that kind of definition, this sense of sharing different values, but because populism is very related to create popular identities, not necessarily with anti-systemic or anti-government, for example, but because it's very related to the drives, emotions, a sense of unification of people. It's like I don't know, the photo themes, something like that, that you can direct all the productions to climate change, for example. Something I was thinking something like that.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Yeah, but it's in a different sense. But this doesn't necessarily mean that we will have entities that have a nationalism sense will necessarily engage in these type of actions. or the other way around, because California doesn't have these sort of movements and this sort of feeling, and they haven't engaged in a certain degree, and in a more limited degree than Quebec has. So it's variable, so they can do it or not. It might be a factor of influence, but it doesn't necessarily need to be applied all the time, and isn't always an explanatory factor.
Great. Do we have any other questions for Anna, or perhaps a comment, something that you would like to discuss, broadly related? I will take that as a no. Anna, thank you so much for presenting your topic today. It was a new topic for me. I found it very, very interesting. I will be stopping the recording now.